Have you ever wondered what would happen if Zwifter gave up the safety of the fixed trainer and entered an actual road race? If so, you are in luck, because that's exactly what I'm going to do today. And it is not a small race either, quite the opposite actually. I've chosen the biggest road race available where I live, led up Czech Republic by Tour de France. 3,500 participants spread across 3 different routes. The long one, which is around 130 kilometers long, medium one, which is about 100 kilometers long, and the short one, which measures about 66 kilometers. And the beauty about the organization of this race was that the last about 35 kilometers were the same for all those routes, and the start was timed in a way that all the riders would meet in those last kilometers and race together. I've chosen the medium one mainly because I really wanted to race it, not just ride it, and I knew I wouldn't be able to properly train for the long one. Because despite training a lot in the past few weeks, in the end I found out that my training wasn't sufficient even for the middle one. But more on that later. This race is all around incredible. 100% of the course is on close roads, there is insane amount of fans on the route, and the race village is incredible. I actually tried to film some videos for you there, but it was so incredibly noisy, basically none of the commentary was audible. But there was a Tour de France museum with actual trophies and jerseys, there were food trucks, beer stands and endless booths full of cycling equipment. As I was saying, I've selected the medium route, 97 kilometers and about 1100 vertical meters. In addition to the whole thing, there were 2 timed KOM segments and 1 timed sprint segment that were classified separately. The ambassador of the race was Sir Bradley Wiggins, who was also riding this race, so I can now actually say I raced the Tour de France winner. The last thing I needed to do before the start was to put my signature onto the signature board, go change myself, and then it was time to race.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Dámy a pánové, je to tady střední trasa právě teď odstartovala. Nekonečný špalír vyladěných, vystylovaných účastníků. Tak a fanoušci, kdybyste mohli
So that was the start of the race, in which I will have 2 goals. One of them is obviously to ride as well as possible, and the other is to stay safe while doing so, because I have no experience riding in the bunch. We are now only 3 kilometers in, and there is the first tricky situation, crossing of the tram tracks, which I was sort of afraid of because I already crashed on tram tracks before, and it is not a nice way to go down. And I was told that there were actually crashes on this crossing, so I'm glad we made it safe here. But there is going to be one more crossing of tram tracks in a little while, and then one more in about 10 minutes. The first 8 kilometers of this race was what is called neutralized lead-in zone, in which technically all racing is forbidden. Here are actually the other tram tracks. But since it took about 2 minutes for all riders to leave the starting pen, there were quite a few opportunities to increase the power even in this lead-in area. And like I said, I'm very inexperienced riding in the bunch, but it was quite intuitive. I was actually surprised that it was very intuitive riding in the bunch. I very quickly learned all the necessary hand signals that riders use during races, and I very quickly got confidence riding in this environment. But I told myself I would respect the neutralized area and basically refrained myself from racing. The only time when I increased the power was when there was clear gap in between the riders and it was safe for me to do so. And we were nearing the hard start of the race anyway. And it is right here. We passed the 8 kilometers, which marked the actual start of the race. I didn't notice any banner or anything, I don't even know if there was one, and then resulted in me going still in very leisurely pace. But I know that after this downhill there is the main square of the town we are currently riding in. This is not Prague anymore. And I know that right here the race is already on, so I increased the power for the upcoming uphill from this town. and started racing. At this point I am probably quite a bit behind the front of the race, and I know that in the coming kilometers I will probably need to output quite a bit of power to bring myself not to front but to a more challenging group, which I actually didn't mind. I had some nice taper in the week coming to this race and I was eager to rip it. And from looking at the map, I knew that after this turn right here there is going to be nice long straight stretch of the road in which I will be really able to start working hard. So I went quite a bit over my FTP to start closing down to riders that were in front of me. But at this point I need to say I'm not very concerned about the group I am in. The guys are going fairly fast and I don't have a feeling that I'm being slowed down or anything like that. But after a few more minutes the group actually did slow down, and at that point I had about 160 watts of normalized power on my bike computer, which was way too low for my liking, so I went to the front and started to work on bringing myself to the guys in front of me. Which I was able to, but my heart rate also got very high. But I actually felt really good, I actually felt fantastic. And since this wasn't a technical part of the course, I went group after group after group. And if I tried doing something like this on Zwift, I would be probably half dead by this point, but here I felt fantastic. But by this point I was among the riders that were already really good, and it took me more and more strength to actually chase down the groups in front of me. I actually may have gone a little too far here, so at this point I'm trying to find myself a group of riders to ride with. But those guys in front of me looked very strong and my heart rate was already very high. And when I looked behind me I noticed there is a group of guys not that far behind me, so I decided to take it a little easier, although it might not look like so here, and wait for them to catch me. And I need to pinpoint one technical thing here. Although it might look like on the footage that the riders are dropping me at times, the lens on the camera that I'm using is very wide angle, so they actually look much further away than they really are. What's more, we are now arriving at the spot that I actually made a mental note about during my recon. Right after this turn there is going to be passage of cobblestones, and the only thing I was focusing here was not to get a mechanical. Thankfully I didn't. I tried to have a light grip on my handlebars to really absorb the shocks and put down enough power to escape this as quickly as possible. Thankfully the period of the cobblestones was very short, and very shortly here we will escape it. I was riding with those two guys for quite a bit, but then I saw that in front of them there was actually quite a big group of riders, so I decided to speed past them and tried one more chase of the riders in front of me. Whenever I did something like this I tried to somewhat control my wattage. I didn't really want to go over 500 watts because that would really blow me up very quickly. But here I actually managed to catch the group fairly quickly, way quicker than I expected actually. And this is the first harder descent of the day, minus 9-10% of gradient. And those were the spots that I was actually the most afraid of, because I'm not experienced descender, I'm Zwifter, I don't have bike handling skills, and obviously hard descents are the most dangerous thing in races like this. If you are wondering why I'm not descending in the drops, it's simply because I feel more confident descending on the hoods. And since I was previewing all the descents on Google Maps before the race, I knew that at the end of the descent was a sharp turn to the first KOM segment and that I would need to slow down. And I'm glad I did such recon on Google Maps, because the turn didn't surprise me, but it did surprise some of the guys. But thankfully it looks like they are okay, and here is the start of the first KOM segment. 2.4 kilometers at average gradient of 4.1%. And the thing that actually surprised me was that on Zwift I'm usually dropped on climbs and chase down others on descents, and here it was the complete opposite. I was being dropped on the descents fairly often, but then I was able to bypass many riders on the climbs. I overpowered the bottom a little bit, but here I already settled into more reasonable pace to climb this climb. I was not really competed for the KOM segment, but I didn't want to slack either. Halfway through the climb, and I'm including this segment mainly to show you how awesome the fans were in this race. Here I have about 200 meters at the top of the segment, so I put the power down one more time to cross it in style. There was a fairly short descent after the KOM, which allowed for a brief rest, but here comes another 7% kicker, and this one is pure sunlight. It was very hot today, it was about 26 degrees centigrade, which might not seem like a lot, but when you are riding in sun, it's obviously way more. I was pushing here way more than was necessary, but I knew that after this there would be a long descent, that I would have another opportunity to rest. I would like to take this opportunity during the descent to ask you, if you like this video, please subscribe. I'm very close to 4,000 subscribers, so let's do a little push to get us through that threshold. It really helps the channel. Thank you very much. I actually have to say I like this descent. It was long, it was steady, there weren't any crazy sharp turns. I was able to go fairly fast without being too worried about my bike handling skills. That was nice. It would once again help me if I rode this on the drops, but I tried to get as aero as possible even on the hoods. And I wasn't actually that slow. I definitely need to improve my descending coming forward, but it wasn't like embarrassing disaster or anything. I'm back to climbing, and this climb is actually super treacherous because it is very close to the first and only sprint segment in the race. And that means if you go too hard here, you won't be able to sprint to your max potential, if that is something that you are interested in. But as you can probably expect, that is something I'm interested in. Sprint is literally the only thing I can position myself well in this race. One more descent before the sprint. I really tried to rest my legs and my lungs here before that. Although I didn't really expect I would have any chance in the sprint, I simply wanted to try my best. And here comes the thing that I have been eagerly waiting for, and it is the sprint segment. And I actually made two mistakes here. The first one is I actually went a little too easy into the sprint. I entered the time segment at 35 km an hour, and I'm convinced that if I push the power more before the start of the sprint, I would position way better actually. But I was doing quite a good power initially, reaching 1000 watts and maintaining over 800 for quite some time above that. But then I figured I wouldn't have chance to place in the sprint anyway, and I didn't really want to destroy myself for the rest of the race, so I eased up a little bit. And what's more, in the final stretch of the sprint there was this guy trying to photograph, and I was sort of afraid I would crash into him, so I slowed down a little bit as well. All in all, it was not a bad sprint, but only the results would show me if I'd regret making those two mistakes. After recovering from the sprint, I got back into the race mode, but here is the same situation as before. Downhill section on which I'm pedaling fairly hard, but I am still dropped. Thankfully there's another climb that allows me to catch up, and I have to say the fans around this climb were awesome. $57K in another descent, and as I was saying at the beginning of the race that my training might not have been sufficient, this is the first spot at which I started to really feel that. I started to cramp like crazy. I tried to stretch my legs as well as possible, change the positions on the bike, and it always helped temporarily, but I had to really decrease my power output because cramps were something I was really battling from this point until the end of the race. But I have to admit the atmosphere was really pushing me forward. Since I mentioned cramps, I should mention also my race nutrition, because that was part of it too. During the race I ate 5 gels from my protein, so my carb intake was quite sufficient. But I actually made a big mistake when it came to fluids. Instead of electrolyte drink, I actually just took water. And I'm convinced that if I took electrolytes, I might not have this problem at all. You are watching another steep descent, and this was probably the most dangerous one in the race. It was very steep at the end, and it had almost a U-turn at the bottom where it was the steepest. You will be able to see that actually very shortly. Once again, from my Google Maps research, I knew there would be a turn, but I didn't actually expect how sharp the turn would be and how steep would be the descent in the turn. So I have to admit that caught me by surprise, but I was able to slow down sufficiently. On the flat terrain afterwards, I tried to stay in the draft to give my legs a little bit of a rest, but what was coming was actually the biggest climb of the day, which, funnily enough, isn't marked as a KOM segment in the race. It wasn't particularly steep, but it was very long and I was unable to go out of the saddle. Every time I tried that, I started cramping like crazy, so I really had to stay seated and try to output as steady power as possible on this climb. We are now approaching Prague back again, and I'm desperately trying to hang on to some riders, but my ability to do surges is fairly limited at this point. We have now 17 kilometers left. A lot of it is actually going to be downhill, so that's a good news. And here I actually managed to find myself a very nice group that really helped me push forward in those last kilometers. Few more moments outside of Prague, and very shortly there is going to be a sign on the right that says we just entered the Prague back again. Five kilometers to go, and we still have 2 hard climbs in front of us. This is the first one. It is not categorized either, but that doesn't mean it's in any shape or form easier. After that we got another nice descent that's going to finish at the start of the final climb of the day, and the second categorized climb. And here it comes. It's only 600 meters long, but it's got average gradient of 8%. I didn't have too much strength left at this point, but I still tried to go out of the saddle and pace this climb nicely, because I felt I wouldn't cramp at this point. I don't know how it works, but I felt that the downhill sort of rested my legs, and I knew that even if I did start to cramp again, the climb and the race would be soon over. This is the top of the climb, top of the second KOM, and now we have the end of the race before us. Last 1.5 kilometers, 2 more little descents, and we would shortly enter the parking lot of the stadium from which this race started and where it would ultimately finish. I'm now going to stop talking, let you enjoy the finish of this race in silence, and hope you will join me after the race for the results. So that was my race, but before we take a look at the results, I needed to wait for arrival of one very special rider. And yes, I arrived to the finish line before Bradley Wiggins. And although you could argue it's because he had multiple signings and interviews on the route, I simply prefer to think I'm the stronger rider. Anyway, the results. On the middle route there were 1442 riders, out of which 19 didn't finish. The winner of this race was able to finish in 2 hours and 25 minutes. I was able to finish in 2 hours and 57 minutes, an average speed of around 33 kilometers per hour. And I'm actually thrilled that I managed to get it under 3 hours. I ended up on 454th spot out of those 1442 riders, which is safely the first third. In my age group, I finished on 126th spot out of 317 guys. There were 25 women who had better time than me, so big kudos to those gals. As you would expect, my KOM result was somewhat worse than my overall ranking, because the same way I'm not a climber on Zwift, I'm not one in real life. So on the timed KOM segments, I ended up on 485th spot. But what about the sprint, which is my discipline of choice? Like I already said, I didn't fully empty myself on the sprint because I didn't expect I had any chance to compete versus the really trained guys. But I ended up on the 24th spot overall and I was missing 4 seconds to the winner. So is it crazy to think that if I started the sprint with better speed and actually hammered it like crazy, I might have had actually a chance to compete for the win? What do you think? All in all, it was an incredible experience. I have a strong feeling that this was not my last outdoor race. Did you like this video? Let me know in the comments if you want me to do more stuff like this. If you are not subscribed, hit that button, and if you like this video, watch the one in which I did 100 miles around Prague. It's right here.